Dear students, welcome to the second complimentary lecture video of our course. Today I will cover chapter 7 and I will discuss about chapter 6 briefly, and then I will move on to chapter 7. Okay, so in chapter 6 basically it talks about the macroeconomics picture as a whole. Please note we are not covering chapter 4 and 5 in our course. Alright, so chapter 6 I have already posted the slides. Those slides are extremely easy to read through, where it talks about the differences between macroeconomics and microeconomics, what a business cycle is, why policymakers seek to diminish the severity of business cycles, how long run economic growth determines a country's standard of living. Okay, so in this chapter, you guys also learned the meaning of inflation, deflation, and why price stability is preferred, right? So, the importance of open macroeconomics, and how economies interact through trade deficits and trade surplus. So there are a lot of things in chapter 6 that you guys are familiar with. So you guys need to know the distinction. So I'm just highlighting between macroeconomics from microeconomics, right? And what a business cycle is, and terms like inflation, deflation, why price stability is preferred, and the concept of open economy, right? So these are the things. Also, some terminologies like trade deficits and trade surplus, right? So I hope that you guys have read the slides which I have already uploaded on Blackboard. I would also recommend you guys to read the textbook. So these are there are some case studies as well. So mostly these are like there are some definitions, like what is a recession, what is expansion, what is a depression. So these are all descriptive. Okay, that's why I'm not covering this chapter in the lecture video webcast, but I will cover lecture 7 and business cycle peak. So when an economy turns from expansion to recession, we call it as a business cycle peak, as all of you guys know that, right? So also at the point which economy turns from recession to expansion is called a business cycle trough, right? So this is a trough, and that's a business cycle peak, right? In my class, there are so many business majors, so you guys definitely need to know what a business cycle is, right? So if you look at this kind of cycle, the peaks are actually the highest points, right? So these are the business cycle peaks, and the trough are the lowest points, right? So if someone tells you calculate the business cycle peak, calculate the business cycle, you have to compare from peak to peak. Okay, that's one business cycle, or alternatively from one trough to another trough is also can be called a business cycle. Okay, that's how a business cycle is measured, right? So you guys know, like when an economy turns from expansion to recession, okay, is known as a business cycle peak, right? So these definitions, you guys should read it, right? Just giving local example, like most of you guys know that Detroit went bankrupt in 2012, right? We are from Michigan, and so it hit the lowest point in 2012. So let me use the green color, right? So in 2012, we hit the lowest point, and then it continued to expand. So we are expanding right now, right? So right now maybe it's 2018, so maybe we are in a peak, right? It seems like, you know, prices of things are going up. If you look at your neighborhood, rents are going up. It's more expensive to live in Detroit now, right? A lot of new things are going around. Okay, so and another concept from here is the unemployment rate. Okay, um, so policymakers uses stabilization policy to tame the business cycle. Okay, sometimes let me write it down. If you might hear something like, oops, let me reduce the size. Okay, you might hear this term. Okay, don't get tame. How to tame the business cycle? Okay, so let me just draw a quick graph. Okay, I'm going through chapter 6 relatively quickly because this chapter is pretty straightforward. So let me just plot a business cycle, right? So let's say this is like a business cycle. Okay, so let's say we are at this point, the highest point in the business cycle. Let's say it's in 2018. Okay, so if we are at the highest point, what's the likely scenario that's going to happen in the next period? Next period, our economy might go to a recession, right? It's sliding through. Now, if you are a policymaker, maybe, if they realize that, yeah, maybe the economy might, go through a recession. So instead of keeping the point here, they can take some steps and move this point to this point, right? So it's better actually not to be on the peak of the business cycle, because if you are on the peak of the business cycle, next period you are going to fall down and go to a recession. So how can a government stabilize stabilize the business cycle? So I am giving you an example. When I first came to when I was doing my undergrad in Singapore in 2006, the housing prices in Singapore was $1 million for a 2-bedroom apartment. Okay, it was like $1 million. Okay, the private apartments, it's very expensive over there, high cost of living. So, and the government, Singapore government, realized that they were actually at the peak of the business cycle, right? So what they did was they slapped a 30% tax or a 20% tax to cool down the market. Okay, this is the policy that they took. So if they take a policy, I don't exactly remember the exact percentage. So if they take a 20% tax, then you are not going to be on the top of the business cycle. So you will slightly move below. Okay, so still it's better if you are somewhere around here, because you don't fall back, right? If you start from point 1 to point 2, you don't fall back, but from point 2 to point 3, there is a fallback. So we don't like to fall back, right? So it's better to use like a taxation policy, maybe. All right, and it's like cooling the market. So those are some sort of examples of stabilization policy. So I really hope you guys read the textbook. Okay, it's very nice. One more thing, if you look here, let's say the blue line is the United States, right? The business cycle of United States. Look at the red line. Red line is the business cycle of Japan. And if you see, Japan has a higher cyclical, right? More variation than United States. If you check the Japanese cycle, why do you think Japan has more variation than United States? Because it's a small economy compared to United States, right? Japan is smaller in comparison to United States, so their business cycle is more volatile. So Japanese business cycle is more volatile than US. So that's why their cycle, you can see there is a drastic, change in their cycle. So they might get heavily affected during recession, and they might expand. So heavily affected during recession, during bad times, right? Negative times they are heavily affected, and during good times they are also growing very fast. So this is the good times, so they are growing fast. Okay? Because it's a small country, right? So more volatility. Small countries more volatile, right? You guys can read the economies in action. I'm not going to compare those. So that's pretty much it of chapter 6. Read the slides. A lot of like descriptive things in this chapter. So what is inflation when price level increases? So make sure you write aggregate price level whenever like there's a question like that. What is deflation when price level drops? So price level drops is deflation. Price level increases inflation. Okay, and price stability is important. All right. They have given some examples of like fast food chain, water open economy where they trade goods and services with other countries, right? When so that's an open economy. What's a closed economy? When they don't trade with other countries. One example of like a maybe closed economy is North Korea, maybe, right? North Korea is a closed economy, right? My pointer is a little bit fuzzy, but it's fine, right? So closed economy is not fair because they don't trade with other countries, right? There are a lot of trade restrictions and things like that. What are trade deficits? When value of goods and services bought from foreigners is more than the value of goods and services it sells to them. So US has a trade deficit to China, right? Because US buys a lot of things from China, but they don't sell that many things to China. So US has a trade deficit to China. Trade surplus when a value of goods and services brought from foreigners is less than the value of goods and services it sells to them. So for China, they have a surplus. China have a surplus because they sell more to the United States, right? For them, the foreigner is US, right? So they sell more to US, but they buy less from US. So China has a trade surplus. US has a trade deficit. Okay, classic example. Okay. In fact, we have a trade deficit of almost $500 billion. Okay, that's a lot. 500 billion. Okay. So, yep, read chapter 6. And so I'm going to cover chapter 7 now. So these are the some key important slides, definitions for chapter 6. So I just touched chapter 6. I didn't go into much detail. You guys can read the examples. Okay, I don't see any point in actually going through them over and over again. So make sure you read the chapter, you read the textbook, and the slides are really straightforward. For chapter 6, it should be pretty easy for you guys, right? So let's start chapter 7. Okay, I'm not saving this, or maybe I could save it, right? Okay, so let me delete this as well. Okay, I just gave a local example. All right. Yeah, so now we will start chapter 7. So chapter 7 is about the GDP and CPI. Okay, so GDP is gross domestic product and CPI is consumer price index. So what are we going to learn in this chapter? Okay, so in this chapter we will see how economists use aggregate measures to track the performance of the economy, right? So what gross domestic product or GDP is, and the three ways to calculate it. So how do we calculate GDP? So that's what we'll see. The difference between real GDP and nominal GDP, and why real GDP is appropriate measure of real economic activity, right? So this is the second thing that we will look at in this chapter. We will also see what a price index is and how it is used to calculate the inflation rate, right? So we will also look into that matter as well. So if you look at this diagram, okay, this is called a circular flow diagram. Okay, usually when you will look at this diagram, at first glance it might seem a lot messy, right? So don't panic. I'll go through them step by step. All right. So in this diagram, if you let's look at the boxes first. So they have government, household, farms. So let me just highlight. So they have government, households, markets for goods and services, factor markets, farms, and rest of the world, and financial markets. So for simplicity, as of now, I just want to avoid financial markets and the rest of the world. All right, for simplicity, because these are like international trade related, which are like chapter 4 and 5, and we don't need to cover maybe these things. But there would be some questions probably in the the homeworks. You will see some problems regarding that. All right, so just do them. So here, if you see, so what happens is in this diagram is, let's say you are a household, right? So if you are a household, what is the source of your income? It's from the, let's say, factor markets, because in the factor markets are like labor, right? So you work in your office, or let's say you work at some firm. So they give you money for your labor, right? You like spend, let's say, 5 hours. Okay, so you get money for them. So you earn the profits and the wages, right? So you earn the wages. So now, as a household, what will you do with the earning? So basic necessities, what people do is they spend for like goods and services. Let's say I have to do grocery, right? I work at Wednesday, they give me some payment, and at the like end of the week, maybe I do grocery for myself, or I might uh, like I have some demands, so I spend money for goods and services, right? So I spend my money for the markets for goods and services. Okay, so for the markets for goods and services, so if I spend money on groceries, or let's say I spend money on gasoline, right? Because maybe I need to drive my car, so I need gasoline for that. So what it does is it creates uh, like create a market for goods and services, and for that we require farms, right? So that's, let's say, the auto industry, because I have a demand for the goods, so that would create farms. So that would create, like, let's say, a grocery store, like a Whole Foods, or let's say Meyer or Walmart, right? Because of my demand, those farms are created, and now these farms will hire more people. So it's like a cycle. So they will hire more people, and if you see, like, Walmart is requiring more workers, maybe these farms are requiring, let's say, if we think about like a General Motors, Ford, they require workers, so they require more labors, so they are willing to give them wages and other things to get the workers, right? Sometimes farms need machineries, right? For machineries, they need to pay them some rent, right? Or they need to pay interest. Okay, so let's say some farms require machineries to, let's say, to cut crops, so they need to hire some machines. So that's a simplified way of seeing things. Now, in the household, what's the role of the government? Government taxes people, so they get our money, right? So government gets our money, and government gives back money to people as well, because after your retirement, you will get your retirement income from the government. Or some people who are in the poverty line, maybe getting free health insurance or like food stamps, food subsidies. So this is basically what is the expanded flow diagram. Okay, so it will be very easy if we just for the time being ignore foreign borrowing and the financial markets, right? So I'm just ignoring that. So this is the simplified version of the expanded flow diagram. All right. If you still have confusion, you can of course rewind the video and watch it again. Right? So almost all countries calculate a set of numbers known as the national income and product accounts. And national income and product accounts or national accounts keep track of the flow of money between different parts of the economy. So they keep a flow of the money. Right? So households earn income via factor market. I have already told you guys that we earn from the factor market, right? We provide our labor to some firms. Like I provide my labor to Wayne State University, and they pay me my salary, right? So I earn my money from the factor market. So what is a stock? A stock is a share in the ownership of a company, right? Held by a shareholder. Bond is borrowing in the form of an IOU, which is literally IO, okay, OU, right? IOU stands for this. So bond is borrowing. In addition, households receive government transfers from the government. Like disabilities of if someone is low income household, they get money from the government, right? So those are like receive government's transfer. So low income household families or those who maybe have some disabilities, they get some form of support from the government, right? And what is a disposable income? Disposable income, right, is total household income minus taxes. Okay, so it's total household income minus taxes. Okay, in my examples I always use abbreviation. So but you guys should not use abbreviation when you write a definition. You should write the entire thing, total household income minus taxes. Okay, so I tell my students, write in full form. Okay, don't write th minus taxes. Okay, so make sure you guys write the entire thing, okay, in entire words. Okay, I use abbreviation because it's convenient. I hope you guys understand, right? So what's private savings? Private savings is equal to disposable income minus consumer spending, right? So that's called the private savings. And the banking, stock and bonds market, which channel private savings and foreign lending into investment, spending, government borrowing, and foreign borrowing, are known as the financial markets. Okay, so basically, the financial market, you know, like private savings, will become like some form of investment, right? And the market which channel these savings are known as the financial markets, right? So we will get into it, so don't worry, we will get into this definition. So these are some definitions that we need to know. So in this example, government purchases of goods and services is paid for by tax receipts as well as by government borrowing. Okay, and exports generate an inflow of funds into country from the rest of the world, while imports, okay, imports lead to an outflow of fund to the rest of the world. Okay, I will soon come to the GDP equation. All right, so I'm coming to the GDP equation now. Okay, So, national accounts. So in this case, inventories are stocks of goods and raw materials held to facilitate business operations. Okay. And investment spending is spending on productive physical capital such as machinery and construction of structures and on change to inventories. And final goods and services are goods and services sold to the final users. And intermediate goods and services are goods and services bought from one firm by another firm that are inputs for production of final goods and services. Okay, so let's go to the GDP equation. Not GDP equation, but the GDP definition. So if I tell you what is gross domestic product, you guys should write it's the measure the total value of all final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year. Okay, it has to be final goods and services. It does not include value of intermediate goods. Okay, so GDP is complete goods that is already being produced. Okay, so if there are like 5,000 cars that are under production, okay, 5,000 cars under production in Ford, okay, Ford Motor Company. Okay, we live in Michigan, and Ford Motor Company, everyone knows about it, right? It's the Motor City, Detroit. So in Ford Motor Company, if there are 5,000 cars that are under production, but they are not yet produced, okay, it's not yet produced, they are under production. Are they part of GDP? No, they are not part of the GDP because they are not final goods and services. So let's say, what are final goods and services? That is already being produced. Like the service that I am giving to my students. Like let's say I give the lecture, lecture 7, lecture on chapter 7, and once I finish it, this service is part of the GDP because it is the final product. Right now, in the middle of the lecture, since the lecture is not yet complete, it's not part of GDP because it's intermediate. Okay, any intermediate good or service is not part of GDP. Okay, it has to be the final goods and services. Like if I give homeworks to my student, if they complete the homework, only then it is a part of the gross domestic product. Okay, because you have completed the maybe the service that might help you in the future. Like I recommend all of you guys to do homeworks on time, right? And sometimes I get requests, like multiple requests, like can I get extension, these and that, but usually like I can't help. Mostly I can't help unless someone is really sick or something. I can give some extension, but usually if you guys ask me, I will politely say that it's not possible because you guys need to do everything on time. All right, so don't, please, I recommend, please finish your homeworks on time, the quizzes on time. That will help you guys. Okay, it's part of the learning process. Right. Okay, enough of ranting all those things. So I hope it's clear what's GDP, right? It's the total value of all final goods and services. Okay, what's aggregate spending? So aggregate spending is the consumer spending, investment spending. Okay, I'm going one by one. So consumer spending, investment spending, government purchases of goods and services, and exports minus imports. Okay, is the total spending on domestically produced final goods and services in the economy. Right? So it's consumption, C, plus I, investment spending, government purchases, G, plus exports, whatever you are exporting to other countries, minus whatever you are importing. Okay, so this is aggregate spending, and in other words, aggregate spending is also like a GDP. Okay, if you think that is the total domestic product, okay, produced locally. Now let's say Apple iPhone. If they are producing the iPhones in China, right, because they have factories in China, are these products part of US GDP? What do you guys think? No, right? Because it is produced in China, it's not produced domestically in the US. So the production part is not part of US GDP. But Apple provides services in the US, right? They have operating systems, they have apps, they have interesting things. Like you can always call Apple, like, yeah, I need this service and that. So the servicing part is part of US GDP because it is produced in US, right? The service, not service is the part of US GDP, right? So talking about Apple, if you guys, I'll just give an example. Do you guys know, like, um, what's the cost of making Apple? It's approximately, we buy it like maybe, because of the hype on everything, maybe we buy it for like $1,000 or close to $1,000. The new iPhones, new features, maybe the cost of making it's only $100. Right? I'm just saying. Okay, I don't know the exact figure, but I read somewhere that is close to about $100, the cost of making the product. All right, and it's already actually they have a 3-year plan. Okay, roughly. It's not like that they just make it and sell it instantly. Okay, so the new iPhones that you guys are buying, they might have been planned 2-3 years before, right? So the ones that we are buying in 2018, maybe they were in production in 2016. Okay, and maybe that's the if it is produced in 2016, it is produced in 2018, right? So it will be part of 2018's GDP because it's the final product. Always remember, it's the final goods. The completed finished product is the part of GDP. Okay, so let's say Ford announced that in 2020 they will make 50,000 cars. Is it part of 2018's GDP? No, right? Because it's not yet produced. But in 2020, once they finish all the cars, then we can say, yeah, it's part of US GDP, and maybe it will increase the GDP in 2020. Okay. I have already shown you guys this diagram, this equation. Right? GDP is consumption, C, plus investment, I, plus government expenditure, G, plus X means exports, and IM means imports. Okay, in some books, okay, this is how it's written in our book. In some other textbook, you might see C plus I plus G. Instead of X minus IM, they will write plus NX. NX means net exports, and net exports is usually calculated by X minus IM. Right? So it's basically the same thing. They just simplify it like this. Okay, so that's what they call GDP. So aggregate spending is like GDP, right? Okay, so here we have to calculate the gross domestic product for 3 companies. If you look at our example, it's the American Ore Incorporated, American Steel Incorporated, American Motors Incorporated, right? So in American Ore, what's the GDP? Value of sales 4,200. They have wages, interest payment, rent, profit. Okay, so the GDP is, so these are intermediate stuffs, not included in the final calculation. Only the value of sales is included. So that's why it's 4,200. Right? Okay. So if you look at the American Steels Incorporated, they have value of sales 9,000, but out of that 9,000, 4,200 is intermediate. So the net one is 4,800. Okay, so the value added by American Steel is only 4,800. Okay, because we have to subtract the intermediate goods from that component. Similarly, from American Motors, 21,500, you have to subtract 9,000 because it is not yet produced. So whatever is produced this year is 12,500, right? When you subtract 21,500 minus 9,000, you get 12,500, right? Yeah. So whatever is produced by each company, now if we sum these three parts together, you get the total value. So total value of these three firms is 21,500. How did we get that? You add 4,200 plus 4,800 plus 12,500. So once we add all these three, it will give us this magic number of 21,500, right? And we have to make sure that we don't include intermediate goods when we are calculating GDP, right? Never use intermediate goods when you are calculating your GDP. Okay. The inquiring minds, this is like an example, right? I usually don't go through the examples because mostly I cover the theoretical parts. Um, in your free time, you guys can read it, and I recommend you guys to read the textbook, right? So this is a key slide 415, okay, which I uploaded. You should have it in a blackboard. So what's included in GDP? Domestically produced. The word domestically is important. Whatever is produced here. New construction or structures, and changes to inventories. Inventories are like let's say if you go to Walmart, okay, you see a lot of things are stacked on shelves, right? But do you think that that is what only that Walmart store has, or they have other? That's not that may be only 10% of what they have. Okay, they don't show everything they have, right? It's not possible to stock their entire thing in the store, right? Because they have limitations. But if they run out of, let's say they're selling like Coca-Cola, or let's say they're selling milk, egg, or things like that, like Walmart is selling those things, they just keep the things that are only maybe required only for that day, right? But they have, like, inventories to stock up. So basically inventories are like stocking them up. But those inventories, changes to inventories, are also part of the GDP. Okay, so during Christmas time, there are a lot of sales, right? During Christmas time, sales on chocolates, or like gifts, right? Children gifts. So those things are stocked, and more inventories are added. Okay, during the Christmas time. So those things are changes to the inventories are part of increasing the GDP. Okay, so what are not included? Never include intermediate goods which are not yet done. Never include inputs. Okay, used goods. Okay, we might have a used projector in the department. That's not part of this year's GDP. Okay, any used goods is not part of GDP. Financial assets like stocks and bonds. Why? Many students ask me why stocks and bonds are not part of GDP, right? So I will get into that later, but for the time being, just remember that we cannot use used goods, we cannot use financial assets like stocks and bonds, and foreign produced goods and services like the iPhones that are made in China is not part of US GDP, right? Because they are foreign. Although we are using the iPhones, but they help the GDP of China because it was made there. But we get service from Apple, right? So the service is US based. So that's part of US GDP. Okay. So if you look at this chart, if you see our, as I have said, that we have $500 billion of like trade deficit. This figure is actually, the book was written in 2010. It's from the third edition. I'm still using the third edition textbook, but you guys have the updated one. Okay. So if you see, our GDP in billions of dollars is about $40,000, 14,527 billion. Okay, that's a huge number. It's like $14 trillion US GDP, right? And out of this 14 trillion, 70% comes from consumer spending. It's from your consumer spending, right? Whatever you spend, like spend on your housing, your like consumer spending is accounting for 70%. That's a very high number. So US GDP is, we can say, it's consumer driven, right? I mean, 70% is a big number. Okay. And in fact, the world, like according to the textbook, the world GDP is about 27 trillion. 27 or maybe 30 trillion. So US has like roughly almost 40 to 50% of the world's resources. Okay, so every economy, depends on the US economy, indirectly or directly, as you can say. Right? How much is the government purchase? Only 20%. Investment spending 12%. So that's interesting. You guys can read slides 17, 18, and 19. Okay, some more examples for the inquiring minds, those who are interested. I basically would cover only the theoretical topics. Okay, you can also read the slide 20 to 22, creating the national accounts. Okay, now another thing that I want to cover is real GDP and nominal GDP. All right. So in real GDP, what is a real GDP? Okay, it's the total value of the final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year. Okay, calculated using the price of a selected base year. Okay, so the base year is, like, say, if I say calculate the real GDP of 2002, then you have to use the base year of 2002. Okay, so you have to use the base year price, and that's how you will calculate the real GDP. Okay, I'll give some examples. So examples are coming. And nominal GDP is the value of final goods and services produced in the economy during a given year using the prices of current year, which is the 2018's prices. Okay. So let me give the example here. Let's say I have one. Let me use another color. Okay, and let's increase this. Let's say I have one apple, two oranges. Right. So one apple costs 2002. It used to cost maybe $1. These are hypothetical examples, okay, not real life. Okay, two oranges and one apple. And let's say each orange is like 50 cents in 2002. In 2018, price of one apple, let's say it's now $5, and let's say oranges is $2.5. Okay. So if I tell you that what is the real GDP of, let's say, there is a person, okay, use a different color, Tom. Tom has 50 apples this year. Okay, let's say five apples in 2018. I tell you guys that calculate the real GDP of Tom using 2002's price. So he has 5 apples and let's say 2 oranges. Okay, 5 apples and 2 oranges. These are Tom's wealth. Let's say the wealth that he has. So if you have to calculate the GDP of Tom, or the real GDP, let's say not Tom, it's like a country, let's say, because people don't have a GDP. Let's say this is let's a hypothetical country, country A. Okay, so calculate the GDP of country A. So 5 apples in 2002 would cost me 5 times 1, because I have to use 2002's price. Okay, I can't use 2018 because I said calculate the real GDP using base year of 2002. I mentioned you the price. So 5 times 1, I have 5 apples times 1, and 2 oranges times 0.5 times 0.5. So I'll have 5 plus 1, it's $6. Okay, that's the GDP of country A. And what GDP is that? It's the real GDP using base year price of 2002. But if I tell you calculate the nominal GDP, you will have to use the current prices. So current prices is 5 times 5, which is 25. So let me use another color. 5 times 5 is 25. Oops. Okay. I should use maybe the purple color is better, right? 5 times 5, $25, plus I have 2 oranges. So 2 times the, I have to use the price of the current year, 2.5. So 5 times 25 and plus 5, it's about $30. So the nominal price shows it's worth $30. Real price shows $6. Right? So that's interesting, right? So why we have to distinguish between real and nominal? Because the real will tell you whether there is improvement in real terms. Nominal will only give you that the value only that is available in the current year. Okay, you guys will do some homeworks. Okay, but hopefully that would make it even more clearer. All right. So in real terms, whether actually the GDP of the country increased or not. Okay, so I can give a country. If you look only in the nominal GDP, countries with high inflation would seem that they're growing very rapidly. Okay, but in real terms, it might not be the case. Okay. So, except in the base year, real GDP is not the same as nominal GDP. Output valued at current prices. Okay. Chain dollar is the method of calculated changes in real GDP using average between the growth rate calculated using an early base year and the growth rate using a late base year. Right? So GDP per capita is a measure of average GDP per person, but it's not by itself an appropriate policy goal. So if you what's the GDP per capita of United States? I think it's roughly about $50,000. Okay, roughly. So that means each person makes roughly about $50,000 per year. Okay, that's the average. Okay, not like everyone, of course. Like we are, some of you guys are students, so obviously you're not earning 50,000 per year. Okay, but the US average in general is 50,000, right? Yeah, I was giving the price of apple and oranges. Actually, here's a better figure in slide 24. If you see quantity of apples times price and quantity of oranges times price of oranges would give you the GDP of year 1. Okay, this would give you the GDP of year 2. Okay, so if you just use the current prices of year 1 and year 2, it would seem that year 2 has improvement of $500. Okay, because they just use their current prices. But if I specifically mention that no, you have to use year one's base price. So if you use year one's base price, you will get 1000 for year one itself, real GDP. But for real GDP of year two, because now you have to use 2200 times 0.25, 1200 times 0.50, because you have to use their price now. Okay, it is mentioned, so it will seem 1150. So in real terms, the improvement is only $150. Okay, not much, right? So nominal terms, it might seem inflated because nominally every year price of things goes up, right? Like your salary, let's say you earn $90,000 after 10 years. Does it mean that you are actually better off than right now? Even though right now maybe you are earning $70,000. Okay, $70,000 in 2018, maybe more than $90,000 in 2028, right? Maybe that is more. So that's actually the concept of why we do like calculate real and the nominal GDP. All right. Actually, let me go over it again because some of you guys, for you guys, it's new. Okay? I don't want to rush through things. Let me actually do one more thing. Right. So here are some numbers. Okay, how to calculate nominal and how to calculate real. Maybe let me just give an example. Let me use the same example. Okay, I'll intentionally go slowly. Okay, so you have, let's say, 2000, year 2000. This is year YR. Let's say year 2018. Okay, so we have quantity of apples in year 2000. Let's say quantity of apples, and let's say quantity of, sorry, price of apples, quantity of oranges, price of oranges. Okay, so in year 2000 I had 1000 apples, I had 500 oranges, and each of them was, apple was 50 cents and orange was $2. Okay. That's the price in 2000, year 2000. Okay, now in year 2018 I have 1200 apples, actually let's say 1000 apples, price is $1. Okay, and instead of 500 oranges, let's say I have about okay, let's say I also have 500 oranges and the price, let's say it's like $3. Okay, so if I tell you calculate the nominal GDP of 2000 and 2018, what's the nominal GDP of 2000? You just multiply using their prices, so it's 1000 times 0.5, 500 times 0.2, so that would give you, let me use the 2000's color. All right, so 500 and 500 times 0.2 is 1000. So the nominal GDP of 2000 is $1500. What's the nominal GDP of year 2018? It's 1000 times 1, which is 1000. Okay, 1000 times 1, and 500 times 3, which is 1500. So the nominal GDP would be $2500. Okay, so if you just compare the nominal GDP, it would seem that there is huge improvement, right? It seems, but in reality there is no improvement, because you still have same number of apples and you have same number of oranges. So then I tell you find the GDP using real values. So when you take real values, and I have to mention the base year. So the base year, let's say, is 2000. All right. Then what you have to do is you have to multiply the number of quantities of apples in 2018 with the price of base year. Base year is 0.5. So it's 1000 times 0.5 and 500 number of oranges in 2018 times the base year price of $2. Okay, so it will be 500. 1000 times 0.5 is 500 and 500 times 2 is 1000, and now you get the real GDP, which is $1500. That means no change, right? So real GDP gives you an accurate picture whether there is improvement in growth or whether there is no improvement, right? If you still don't understand it, review the video again, read the textbook, and practice the homework problems. All right, so here are some figures. So in real terms, so if you just look at nominal GDP, it seems that in 95 there was 7,000 and 2000 there's 14,000. It seems there is like 2 times growth. But then when we use the base year price of 2005, it seems like the growth is like 1.5 times. Okay, real gives you a more accurate picture. Okay, some figures. Okay, some graphs. This graph is interesting. It's like saying that rich is better, money matters less as you grow richer, money is in everything. Okay, this is actually part of development economics. Okay, not necessarily rich countries are the happiest, right? They have income on the x-axis and they have happiness in the y-axis. So they are saying that Denmark has high income and high happiness, but look at like Israel, they have relatively high income, but not Israel. Let's say let's look at Hong Kong, or let's look at Japan, right? Japan has such a high income, like 45,000, almost close to US, but their happiness is only 20% of people are happy. So income doesn't mean that people are happy, right? Or whereas low income like Israel here, lower income than Japan, but level of happiness is 80%, or even like UK, right? So part of development economics example. Okay. That's if you guys are interested, you can look at that. You guys can read the economics in action if you like it. Like Miracle in Venezuela, they have very high inflation and things like that. Okay, so now let's talk about the price index. So the aggregate price level is a measure of the overall level of prices in the economy, right? And to measure the aggregate price level, economists calculate the cost of purchasing a market basket. Okay, so a market basket and a price index is the ratio of the current cost of the market basket to the cost in a base year multiplied by 100. So let's say this year I have 5 apples, 2 oranges, or like let's say one or two other fruits. Okay, that's what I have in this year. So the cost of that basket in the given year divided by the cost of market in the base year, okay, times 100. So price index gives an idea that how much is the index every year, okay, based on the ratio to the base year. They have calculated the price index. So in this example, Let's say the economy has only oranges, they have grapefruit, and they have lemon. Okay, so that's the price of the basket before the like frost. So this is pre-frost, this is post-frost. Okay, so before the frost, obviously price of things were cheaper because there were a lot of oranges, grapefruit, and lemon. So they calculated the price of that basket is $95. Okay, before the frost. And after the frost, the price of oranges went up, grapefruit went up, lemon went up. Now you multiply the quantities that you have. You have 200 oranges, 50 grapefruit, and 100 lemons with their respective prices. You get 175. Okay, so uh, if I tell you to find the price index, you have to use the cost of market in the given year divided by the cost of market in the base year times 100. So if the base year is 95, like let's say the base year is pre-frost, and I want to compare post-frost with pre-frost. Okay, so I basically would have to do 175 over 95, like post-frost over pre-frost. If pre-frost is base, okay, if I have set it, they have to mention which one is base, right, and which one you are comparing. So times 100. And inflation rate is the yearly percentage change in price index, typically consumer price index. All right. So the consumer price index measures the cost of the market basket of a typical urban American family. Right. So it's usually like price index in year two minus index in year one divided by price index in year one times 100. So if I want to calculate the inflation rate of 2018, it will be price of 2018 minus price of 2017 divided by price of 2017. Okay, not enough space, but I'm still writing, and times 100. That's how they calculate inflation. Okay, so actually this is the inflation rate of 2017. I can't calculate 2018's inflation rate yet because I will need 2019's price. Will we get 2019's price in 2018? Not possible. We are not fortune tellers, right? So you can only calculate the inflation rate of the previous year, right? Because 2018 you need the 2019's price, right? That's funny, right? Maybe you can shoot a comment and on YouTube and like the video and tell your friends. Yeah. So these are some of the things that are included in the consumer price index. I mean, 41% comes from housing, food and beverages 15%. These are the things that we spend most our money on, right? We spend on housing, we spend on food and beverages, we spend on transportation, right? Mostly these. So these are part of the consumer price index, right? Is CPI biased? Okay, you guys can read it. Okay, so CPI is actually a good measure. I mean, if you look at the consumer price index, like if we look here, it tells that the inflation rate is very close to the consumer price index, right? The things have gone up like 2%, 3%, 4% every year, log of consumer price index. So similar index we also have, which is also called the producer price index, that is also used to measure like how much things are actually going up or not. And economists use the GDP deflator, which measures the price level by calculating the ratio of nominal GDP to the real GDP. Okay, so this is important. GDP over. So the concept of GDP deflator is important. Okay, so some graphs here as well. Okay, so that's about chapter 7. Okay, so I went through chapter 6 like in 15 minutes and about 15 minutes for chapter 7. Now what I'm going to do is like discuss about quiz 2. Okay, it will be due on, let's say I still have to think about it when I have to make it due. Okay, I created the quiz 2 for you guys. Okay, I'll make it due till, okay, due on February 15th, right? 2018. And let's say, and you guys have to email it to the same address, right, where you guys email me your quiz. I will upload a Excel template for quiz 2, and I will show this on the YouTube channel, and you guys have to email it to me by February 15th. Please do not uh, copy from one another, or do not submit it late, right? So it's always better to save it in PDF form. Okay. So by February 15th, you guys should submit quiz 2. Okay. So let me just go through the stuffs. An expansion is a period in which option A, output declines, price level falls, option B, C is output rises, D is unemployment rises. Okay. So you can pause it. Question number 2, if a country runs a trade deficit, its investment spending is probably, so these are the 4 options. Okay. All right. Question number 3, 4, and 5, fiscal and monetary policies. Okay, these are the 4 options. Question 4, which of the following is true? Okay, you can read you can pause the video and read the questions. Question 5, households derive income from all of the following except, these are the 4 options. Okay. Question 6. Okay, use the following to answer question number 6. Calculating GDP using the information in the table provided. So this is the table. Which of the following is correct calculation for GDP? Hint is C plus I plus G plus X minus IM, right? Yeah, I'm not going to tell more. Not want to give you the answers. So these are the options for question number 6. Okay, question number 7. Use the following to answer question 7. Okay, real and nominal output. Nominal GDP in year 2. So you have to use year 2's price. Okay, that's the hint. Okay, these are the 4 options. Okay, the last 3 questions. Which of the following would not be included in this year's GDP? Option A, B, C, D. Question 9. Which of the following is an example of an intermediate good? Okay, option A, option B, option C, option D. And the last question, the GDP deflator is equal to, okay, I just covered it, A, B, C, or D. Okay. So thank you so much, class. It was a pleasure to cover chapter 6, 7 and I hope you guys finish the quiz by February 15th. Email it to me. I will upload the quiz template for Quiz-2 template, and you guys have to uh, like use it to send me the answers. Okay, so Quiz-2 template would be uploaded. Okay, thank you so much, and have a nice weekend.